Good evening, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending. The start with apologies. I know we've got apologies from Kathy Wells and Tom Wells and Councillor Douglas Godwin. Are there any other apologies? None that were okay. Thank you. Declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests and other disclosable interests. Have we any from anybody? No. Thank you very much. Right, officers. Simon, we're used to seeing with us is our development manager. North, it says, isn't it? North and south.
Chair.
Oh, I've skipped past them. Yeah, sorry. My apologies. We'll go back to the minutes. Has anybody any comment on the minutes for the last meeting? No. In which case, can I have a proposer, please? Thank you, Peter, and a seconder. Thank you, Daniel. Oh, you weren't here. In that case, I'll take Andrews. Those in favour, can you say aye, please? Any to the contrary? No, so that's unanimous. Thank you. Right, I'll start that again. Simon, I say, as our development manager. It says north, isn't it? North and south.
North Committee usually.
Yeah, just north. Yeah, well, never mind. Okay, thank you. Jack Hanley, I think lots of us have dealt with, but his first committee meeting, he's not only is it the first committee he's been at us with, but he says as its previous council, he didn't have to deal with things like this. So tough, Jack. You'll find we're horrible to you. Right, welcome anyway. Jenny on my right is going to keep us in order, our legal advisor. Bronwyn, who sets everything up and makes sure it all happens. Thank you, Bronwyn. Right, I've no particular comment at this stage. I will have one slightly a bit later on. Update report, there is none on this one, which is a bit unusual. So we're then on to the application. And Jack, it's come rather quickly for you. You're on. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this application seeks permission in principle for up to 7 dwellings on land at Peachley Lane. So the assessment of applications, permission in principle, is restricted to location, land use and amount of development. So the site is located on the southern side of Peachley Lane, within the open countryside. As you can see from the aerial photograph, sorry, next slide please. Sorry. Yeah, as you can see from the aerial photograph, the site is bounded by vegetation to the north and west. Vegetation comprises of trees and hedgerow. So yeah, next slide please. So you can see on from the map, the development boundary of Lower Broadheath adjoins the application site to the north, south and west. And yes, having assessed the application with regards to location, land use and amount of development, for the reasons outlined within the committee report, officers recommend that the application is approved. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, short and concise. Right, we've no official parish council representative, but the chair of the parish council has asked me to comment, and I think to some extent I agree, in that the site visit was very restricted in its nature, in that we could only see the outside and a big tall hedge. Our officers, I've just brought this up and said, basically it's because at this stage there is very little more that can be gained by going on site. It's more if it was the next stage, which they'll have to come back to if this actually does get approved, is the technical detail stage, and at that time it would be more appropriate to actually visit the actual site itself. Even so, I must admit, it did feel rather peculiar just looking at the big hedge on the outside. And I'd like that recorded if possible, that we were slightly disappointed. Sorry, Simon.
Just to clarify, obviously we undertook a site visit. We looked at it from Peachley Lane and from a couple of vantage points on there. So what we were looking at in terms of the limitations of this application was the context really of the site. The next stage looks at the detail if members approve this stage, and of course then you'd have a layout in front of you and you'd be able to assess things like the relationship of that layout to neighbouring properties, which obviously members are aware of the context and they saw the context of what was around around the site. Just wanted to point that out because obviously there was a site visit, but we didn't actually go onto the field.
Yeah. Fine, thank you for that clarification. Right, and we have an objector, Miss Bernadette Powell. If you'd like to take the seat over there and press the right-hand button, and when the light comes on, start speaking. And you have 3 minutes
Thank
from the time you start speaking.
you. Yeah.
No, it needs to go on again. Try again. That's it. Oh, my.
Good evening, all. Right, I sit here independently and on behalf of all the local residents regarding the application for Peachley Lane. Of the numerous local residents that I've spoken to, there was a unanimous consensus that the local residents are against this application, and many have made formal objections on the planning application and have signed to confirm this. So I've got lots of signatures here from all the local residents. Obviously, I've gone round knocking people's doors, etc. If the application is approved, there will be a negative impact on the infrastructure, such as the roads, the water supply, which is already under strain. We regularly receive alert texts from the water supplier, including today, regarding burst pipes, low water pressure. There'll also be an adverse impact on the local services, the schools, the doctors, the dentists, which are already oversubscribed. We are all very concerned with the negative impact on the vegetation, the habitat and the wildlife that will be affected. We're seeing our village being eroded into a town and losing the rural aspect. We believe the site is outside of the SWDP development boundary, so surely this should be adhered to and focus on sites that are inside the boundary. Peachley Lane is a single track country lane with no formal footway. The increase in traffic will place residents into a vulnerable position due to the increase in traffic, impacting on dog walkers, horse riders, young families, cyclists and runners. There's also a 7.5 tonne restriction on this lane. The extra traffic through the village has increased, bringing with it extra noise and pollution. Any further overdevelopment will only add to this. Regarding extra traffic, there is an access issue, not only with the site, but the exits from Peachley Lane would either be onto Hallow Lane, exiting onto a dangerous blind bend, or the other exit onto Martley Road, going past the small village school and the safety concerns that go with that. We live in a democratic society with the majority of local residents objecting to this application, and we would appreciate our voices being heard and validated. I would like to ask the committee, which I think you've said that you went to see the site, but you didn't actually see it properly. Has the committee had the chance to view all of the objections that are on the application site, so that can assist with making any decision? Thank you. And the other question that I've got, which is in particular to the planning officer, I don't know if that's Simon, so I do apologise, who apparently has recommended approval. After reviewing all the valid objections that the local residents have put onto the site, what was the overriding factor that led to the decision being made for it to be approved? I don't know whether that can be answered now or not. But
I might ask the planning officer to do so in a minute,
Yeah, that's fine.
as an explanation to councillors, actually.
and I think the final thing that was to say was just that we believe the field is of ridge and furrow, and it's really important to keep this landscape, which dates back to our ancestors. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity of speaking to you all.
For that. Right, I've got down that we've got an agent. Q. And it's Natasha Blackmore de Silva. Thank you. And you have 3 minutes as well. Thank you.
Good evening. I am here to speak on behalf of the applicant in support of this permission in principle application on land at Peachley Lane, Lower Broadheath. I thank officers for their constructive feedback and assistance to date and fully endorse their positive recommendation. As this is a PIP application, the scope of the assessment is limited to location, land use and amount of development. As Malvern cannot currently demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, the current housing policies related to Lower Broadheath are considered out of date. Therefore, sites which are locationally sustainable and on the edge of categorised settlements are considered suitable sites for new housing in principle. This site is located directly adjacent to the boundary of a Category 1 village, and within an acceptable walking and cycle distance of the services and facilities within that village, including the primary school, shop and post office. For further afield trips, there is a bus stop within 300 metres of the site with direct routes to Clifton-on-Thames and Worcester. Therefore, as the site is locationally sustainable, the location is considered suitable. I do note the objections from neighbours, the parish council related to site access and drainage, and the ward member has reiterated these concerns regarding the suitability of the access. However, the case officer has confirmed in their report that site access does not represent a matter for consideration at PIP stage, only location, and the Highways Authority have confirmed that they have no objection to the site on location grounds. Other highways-related matters, including site access, are to be dealt with at technical matter stage when full details of the scheme's site layout and proposed access arrangements will be provided for assessment. Regarding drainage, the case officer has confirmed that the site is in flood zone 1 and an area at low risk of surface water flooding. As such, the application is acceptable with regards to flooding and drainage. In regards to the land use, the site will continue the existing settlement pattern along Peachley Lane, which is characterised in bilinear residential development. Therefore, the proposed use of the site for residential development is acceptable in principle. Regarding the amount of development, the case officer has confirmed that 7 units could be accommodated on the site. Therefore, this would be an appropriate density for an edge of settlement site, and the amount of development proposed is acceptable. I do note the additional comments related to biodiversity and character, etc., have been made. However, these are technical matters and should be dealt with at the subsequent stage, not during the PIP process, once full details of the scheme, access, and third-party reports have also been provided. In summary, the scheme is compliant with PIP policy and provides much-needed housing in a sustainable location within Malvern. We hope that this is a straightforward decision to approve the scheme in line with the officer's recommendations and trust that members will agree. Thank you.
Thank you. Whilst you've been speaking, I've been considering the previous speaker's request, and actually the officer's report is online, and his reasons are given, his balanced reasons are given there. This committee is here to decide whether that balance is correct, and that's what we're about now. So I hope that satisfies your question in that case. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry. Daniel, you're on.
Thank you. Okay, so I've brought this application before the committee today to hear thoughts and comments from fellow committee members. I'd like to obviously thank Planning Officer Jack for his really comprehensive report, but obviously it's at committee because there are elements within this application that may concern me, and because we have seen a local groundswell of concern over this application. To be honest, in Lower Broadheath, we're certainly not NIMBYs. Our village is now hanging on to being a village, having seen so much development in such a short space of time. Prior to me being elected in 2019, we saw 2,500 houses being approved and are now being built out on the edge of the village, pretty much adjoining us to Worcester. So we're not against house building, and we're certainly, and we've certainly seen our fair share of it. My concerns, though, with this development come through how much it conflicts with SWDP, and I know this is only a PIP, and I will fluctuate into some areas of technicalities within this, but there's an underlying concern around accessibility, which is certainly should be considered at this point. And that's not to say the access of the site, but the accessibility of this site as a whole. So I believe by not focusing on so the main problem with this is around sustainability of the site through its accessibility as a potential site in principle. The tilted balance in favour of development due to housing land supply shortfall should not override these substantial and these particular arms. Backed by the fact that there is no local shortfall, we should consider whether we should build unsustainable development when I know we put so much time and effort into creating a sustainable settlement not so far down the road. As these 7 houses, are these 7 houses needed when 170 of the 2,500 to be built out have just been occupied and more are being rolled out quickly? I'll list the issues I believe we need to cover. Some of these are not PIP concerns. They will come into play at any potential outline planning stage and are technical considerations, but I do want to state them here as I think it's beneficial for everybody involved. So firstly, the site does lie outside the defined development boundary of Lower Broadheath and is therefore classified as open countryside under SWDP2. Residential development is explicitly not permitted in such areas except in special circumstances, which I can't see how this application meets due to its potential lack of sustainability as a site due to the lack of accessibility. The purpose of the development boundary is to maintain sustainable growth while protecting countryside character. This proposal undermines that strategy as stated in the officer's report. Number 2, contradiction of the character of the area. This proposal would introduce a cluster of housing that is incongruous and disruptive to the prevailing rural landscape. The narrow linear form does not compensate for the intrusion into what remains open agricultural land. The officer concedes that the development lies in the countryside, but I believe falsely that it would represent an incongruous and out-of-character addition. This is debatable as we've yet to see the layout and not supported by local opinion or the landscape assessment guidelines. Number 3, I suppose the elephant in the room, highways and access concerns ignored. Just going back to the previous speaker's comments, highways have not stated that accessibility is a problem. Obviously, highways are not involved at this stage because it's a technical concern. So they've not stated anything around accessibility in terms of the report. Obviously, that would come out outline planning. As you can see from the image before, if you've not been to Peachley Lane, it's a very, very, very narrow lane. It's unlit, it lacks a footpath, and there are no passing places, making it very unsafe for pedestrians and inappropriate for construction vehicles. The only access to this particular site or any houses built here would be via Peachley Lane. I think it's sort of off-putting on the map because you can see other houses behind, but there is no access from there. It is literally from that narrow lane. So we're talking about accessibility to this site and whether that's sustainable. My concern is that using just that lane alone sort of bars that as being inaccessible. Increased vehicle movements, whether it be construction, residence or delivery services, will obviously increase congestion, which we already see on Peachley Lane, and safety concerns for all road users, especially those walking to nearby schools. Despite over 48 local objections citing this as a primary issue, this has obviously been stated as a technical detail, although access is a core component of the site's sustainability, and that's one of the things we should be considering at this time as a PIP. If this is a planning principle, then one of the leading principles should be sustainability and should be its accessibility. So not focus on the technical aspect of access. The accessibility of this site to any potential future residents is an issue. The claim that walking 160 metres down an unlit rural lane with a 30 miles per hour limit is accessible shows a disconnect from the lived experience of residents and the reality of road safety. I have walked this lane a lot. To be honest, I run in there and I don't run down this lane because it can be that dangerous. And that's why current development stops where it does, because it's very difficult to get down that road. Environmental harm and loss of biodiversity, SWDP 22 and 5, and this goes to the PIP question of, is the land suitable? The development would result in the destruction of a species-rich priority hedgerow, which provides essential habitat for bats, birds and deer. We stood in front of that very hedgerow and stared at it for half an hour yesterday. There is no ecological assessment submitted at this stage, meaning environmental damage has not been assessed. But there should be a material consideration even at PIP stage, given the site's value. This sits in open countryside between Hallow and Lower Broadheath. I'm sure we can all appreciate how areas like this are becoming a real haven between increasing developments in both Hallow and Lower Broadheath. The increased lighting and noise from the development would disturb nocturnal species in what is currently a low impact, ecologically valuable landscape. And honestly, this area is it's amazing for wildlife on an evening. And like I say, it's becoming slightly squeezed out between the two growing villages. Loss of mature hedgerows and potential oak trees is in direct contradiction to both SWD policies 22 and 5 and the landscape guidance for the area. And as per point 7 to 10, as per Natural England's agricultural land classification map for the West Midlands, the application site comprises grade 3 agricultural land. This constitutes best and most versatile agricultural land, meaning that the proposal would result in the loss of BMV land. Cumulative impact on infrastructure. Lower Broadheath has already doubled in size in recent years. We've had the housing development at the top of Bell Lane 10 years ago, and from the numerous pockets of large developments leading to the west of Worcester development for 2,500 houses. Local amenities, including the school, sewage, drainage and water pressure, are already strained. The primary school is full, the secondary school is full. Every other day we lose water pressure in the village, and the previous speaker is correct. I got that text message this morning saying that we had no water pressure yet again. Drains are overflowing, and for long parts of the day there is traffic through the village, forcing more cars onto Peachley Lane. I appreciate in the report it lists the local amenities, all of which would need to be walked to or taken by car as in no public transport to them. A walk is genuinely dangerous, and as I said before, there was no footpaths. The nearest convenience store, the absolutely fantastic Lower Broadheath community shop, is located, I think, about just over a kilometre away. It's a community store, which obviously then has limited opening times, and the nearest store with longer opening times is in Worcester. The nearest primary school, just under half a kilometre away, Lower Broadheath Primary School is located, not too far, but it's full. And it lists the nearest secondary school as the Bishop Perrone Church of England College. I think it's actually the Chantry is nearer, and that would be the secondary school, but that's full. I know that as a governor, that's full for some years to come. And the application fails to demonstrate our local infrastructure will accommodate more housing, and no mitigation is proposed. I know, again, it's not expected at this stage as technical detail, but I struggle to see how mitigation for all these infrastructure issues could be delivered. As stated in the report, the last bus from Worcester to the village on a weekday and on Saturdays is at 5:30, meaning that for most jobs in Worcester, a bus is not appropriate. So there are bus stops, there's just no buses, which I think all of us in rural areas are pretty used to. And if you work further than Worcester, you've got no chance of being home without using a car. There are no cycle routes, and footpaths even to Worcester are too narrow. And then on to drainage and flood risk. Again, technical issue, but there are real flood concerns in this area. Again, highways, we've had long conversations about what that particular corner floods constantly. It does do. And finally, on to public and parish objection. The parish council has formally recommended refusal based on the accessibility, the drainage and the unsuitability of this land, and also protecting this particular piece of land as well. The application has attracted 48 written objections from residents, unanimous in their concerns over access, road safety, infrastructure and environmental damage, all of which I believe are shared here. The decision to ignore these material concerns, especially from statutory consultees and local community, would certainly undermine public confidence in planning process, bearing in mind that we've seen so much planning already in the area. So in conclusion, obviously wait to hear the comments from my fellow committee members. I'd like to thank everybody involved in bringing this application and the planning officer, but I have enough concerns to need to hear this at committee, even at PIP stage. The facts that this site is outside the development boundary, lacks safe access, will harm biodiversity and character, and further burdens overstretched local infrastructure. The in-principle approach should not be used to gloss over obvious site limitations. This, I am concerned, is not a suitable location for further development, and the cumulative harm far outweighs the nominal of benefits of 7 houses. As Jack has said, the 3 things we should really consider are location, land use and amount of development. I'm concerned against all 3 of these measures. However, its accessibility is a site that I believe I'm most concerned about, and this does strictly come to where this site is, in principle, as an inappropriate site for development, potentially. The site has also been denied planning approval in the past. There are 2 outline planning applications, and since then the surrounding infrastructure has not improved, but the demand on it has increased. Sorry, that's quite long, but I'll leave it there for others to comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Right. Comments from other councillors, please.
This isn't a comment, really, it's a question. Could I ask what all of this land is used for at the moment, please?
Yes, my understanding that it's currently agricultural land,
But
part of an agricultural.
what do they do there? What is it used for? Oh, it's equestrian. Horses. Okay, thank you.
Right. Paul.
We heard earlier on that this road is subject to a 7.5 tonne weight limit. Does that have any implications, as it would need more than 7.5 tonnes for the building of it to get material on site?
Thank you.
I think you'll be aware of the standard condition which is normally attached relating to a construction environment, CEMP condition, which looks at access for construction workers and deliveries, etc. So that would be something that at any future technical details consent stage, if approved, would be attached. But obviously also, highways would have the option to comment on that particular point as well. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor David Harrison.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members, for going there and the officers for their report. By golly, this is a difficult one. Development, obviously, in Lower Broadheath has been massive, but that's not the point that we are here to determine. We're here to determine whether this can have 7 houses, properties, bungalows, blocks of flats, could be anything. That's what PIP does, gives permission for anything. It's interesting because I did a little bit of research, and I don't know whether there's any residents that are here from the houses opposite, but I would imagine they could be. Now, the land opposite, I thought, was there, and the road was actually put through. That's not actually the case. The land on both sides of the road was built up, according to the information that I've got. So I don't know what's in the land. It could be an interesting fact. But more interesting than that is that all the houses on the north side of the road, assuming that's north up the top, you have to go up a bank to get to them. And they're built up. And exactly the same would have to happen on this side, because looking through the hedge as we did in one place, we managed to have a little look, and it looks like it's between 2 and 4 foot raised above the level of the road. If that is the case, and what have you, there's an awful lot of spoil that's got to be taken out. Jack's very kindly nodding his head to say yes. That's obviously got to go down this road. Now, obviously, highways could come along and they could say, oh, well, we'll lift the 7.5 ton limit. But then why is the 7.5 ton limit there? I'm not impressed with this site at all. I think there's far better sites in Malvern Hills district that could satisfy what they are trying to do. Difficulty is the land area of the land where it's actually situated could possibly be a reasonable site for housing, but we don't know what's underneath it to be done at technical stage. We don't know how they're going to get there. It's technical stage. People were saying and have said that there's a problem with sewage. Well, it's interesting because there's a sewage pumping station within 5 feet of this site in the bottom left-hand corner of that particular site up there. Those people that listened to the news this morning will be very pleased to find out that a low pressure on your water supply, I think, gives you now £100 per day for low water pressure. So there'll be a lot of you claiming that, I would imagine. And if you're cut off, it's £250 a day. So are they building this or trying to build this so they can get the money from Severn Trent? I don't know. I would have thought that's more part of this than it would be a technical stage, but I don't know because I'm not there. I think it's not the best of sites that are available. I was quite interested that they hadn't, looking at the map up there, being as they own, or the blue line is situated around the rest of the site up there. I thought that's strange that they were doing that and not going in through the blue site, which they possibly could. I know the residents wouldn't be happy about it. But to go through the adjoining road and what have you, which they cannot do from this PIP, because this PIP has got a red line round it, and that's the area that we're discussing. So they cannot come forward with an alteration for the planning inspector that they're going to put an access in a different site. or a different way. As I said, I'm not happy with it and what have you, and I'm going to leave it there until we come to a vote.
Right. Councillor John Michael.
Thank you, Chair. Is that working? Yeah. I find these PIPs very awkward to make a decision on, because virtually any piece of land you could put up and it might be suitable, but what you will get, you never know. I do wish that planners would stick to the pre-apps. They could discuss this with the officers, come up with a plan and present it to us. It's a far better, because all we're going to end up with, if we approve this, is it will come back to us in an outline thing. And we may well chuck it out there. That's why I find them so frustrating, to be quite frank, and very hard to argue against in many respects. Okay.
Thank you. Anybody else? I'll add my little bit to it, in that if it was a different, I know the access isn't important, theoretically, at a PIP, but if it was one that was more sustainable, because there is no sustainable access to it, to my mind. You have got no pavement and it is unlit on a very narrow piece of land. So any usage of the facilities, even the church in a winter's evening, the village hall in a winter's evening, the local pub of the winter's evening, they would all involve walking a certain amount of distance in the dark on a narrow lane. So on that very narrow basis, I wouldn't consider this, I think, to be suitable as a site with this access. Simon wishes to come back. I think now would be a suitable time for him to do so.
Okay, I just wanted to, and I know Jack's covered some of these points in the report in terms of distances. I had a look at this, and one of the appreciate there's we know what the character of Peachy Lane is like. It hasn't got a footway along most of its length. However, the facilities which residents of the development, if development went ahead, that are available in the village and that they would wish to travel to if they were walking, school, church, the bus stop on Hallow Lane, the Bell Inn, the shop, the community shop, are all pretty much located to the south or southeast of the site. And as a consequence of that, and I don't know if the slide, yes, this probably shows it a little bit better. Obviously, the members that were on the site visit will have recalled that the just a couple of houses along from the western edge of the site, and we don't know where the access into this would be at this stage, but if it were at this end, we've got a couple of properties, and then we've got the alleyway through onto Jackham Road. Once you're on Jackham Road, you've got then footways on virtually every road that take you to all those facilities. So the school, the church, Hallow Lane bus stop, Bell Inn, the shop. Yes, you have to cross over the road a few times, but there's footways on all of those roads, because the estate to the south is largely, you know, a modern post-war estate with footways both sides. So it's not like some sites that we've refused that are in a more rural setting, where there's only a rural lane and it's on a lane and there's nothing else and there's no footway and no lighting. Admittedly, none of those estate roads appear to have any lighting. So of an evening, in the winter, yeah, it might not be as attractive a proposition. But then we also have to remember that this is a Category 1 settlement, and the site's adjacent to the settlement boundary. We've had a lot less sustainable locations than this one. So, that's an important factor to bear in mind. In terms of the walking distances to these facilities, I had a look at these. Depending on where you measure from, obviously, because if you measure from the western end of the site as opposed to the eastern end of the site, depending on where the access might be along that frontage, that adds on some distance. So for the school, you've got between, these are approximate dimensions, 463 and 563 metres. The church, 410 to 490. Hallow Lane bus stop, 450 to 530. Bell-in, 850 to 930. Shop, 895 to 970. So they're all less than a kilometre. And I think, Jack, you had an extract from, yeah, and I just borrow that, yeah. Remind me what that document was. That was the.
It's the Worcestershire County Council Streetscape.
That's right. Yeah, the streetscape design guide, which forms, I think, through a reference in the development plan, part as a bit like a supplementary planning document, part of the development plan. In that document, at section 2.5, it says, in terms of accessibility, sustainability requirements, it says, walking is generally considered a viable travel choice up to 2,000 metres, which takes about 25 minutes to walk, where short journeys are required. So all the facilities that Broadheath has to offer, and appreciate, it's not a vast selection, but it's many more than some of the smaller settlements and hamlets, are considerably less than 2,000 metres. Well, less than half the distance in terms of the shop, which is the furthest facility away. So that's something to bear in mind when considering this proposal in terms of its locational sustainability and the prospect of successfully defending that matter at appeal if members were minded to refuse it. So I feel obliged to, because these are obviously figures and statistics that are going to be cited in any appeal which might follow a refusal. So please have that at the forefront of your minds. I think that's mainly the main point, because all the other concerns, and although it does seem very counterintuitive, and this is a relatively new type of application, we might be 3 or 4 years into this type of application now, which is different from an outline permission, which would establish the principle of development, and then you're somewhat shackled to that, even if you don't like the reserve matters that follows it. This is sort of the other way around. So we're only looking at a very narrow selection of issues. If subsequently, following an approval, the technical details stage, members were unhappy with or the other consultees were unhappy with the statutory consultees, that is, with the access or impact on the ecology through the loss of the hedgerow, or the number of units, the layout, the impact on character and appearance, those could all be potentially reasons for refusal, and the matter would go no further. It can't go anywhere without the second stage. So yes, it might be a waste of time, you could say, if permission was granted at this stage and subsequently a subsequent application was refused, but that's not a consideration for us. We're just here to look at the merits of the proposal on those narrow principles, and that's what members should stick to in their consideration. So I think that's covered all I wanted to say.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Andrew Wilmot.
Thank you, Chair. It's handy that we've got the overview on the screen up there. And if I can go back to the comments that have been made about the nature of the land on either side of the lane, that land is higher up by 2 to 3 feet. If you look at the premises to the north of the lane and the size of those plots and the ability of those houses to be set back from the lane, I will remind the councillors who were able to visit the site that while we were there, at one of those premises, I think towards the east, the car left the drive. Not a large car with a long wheelbase, but a relatively small car. To get out onto the small lane, he had to go onto 3 wheels. So he was pivoted on 3 wheels to get into and presumably out of the lane. Given that the land strip on the southern side is in fact narrower than the land strip on the northern side, I can't see how that could be avoided without levelling the whole site. We're looking at the generality of the suitability of the site. And I think on that generality, it fails. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. Councillor Williams. Jones-Williams.
Jones-Williams. Thank you very much indeed. Yes, site visits are very, very useful indeed. But as this is a PIP, it's a very difficult one, and I just jotted a few notes down. Although these PIP applications are fairly new, we've already lost several appeals. Did we not lose one at Aberley?
Yeah.
And we've also lost one down at Broadwas. Because obviously we've got to judge it on accessibility, location. What was the other one?
There's a land of development.
Yeah, and so if we should refuse this tonight and it went to appeal, could we actually defend it? Because it's only those 3 issues it's got to be like the defended, isn't it? Because the highways issues at this stage can't be a reason for refusal anyway. I can't see that we can actually make a decision on this site until full planning application actually comes in. So I find it extremely difficult in my mind as to which way we're going to go because of defending whatever reason for refusal, as the reasons will be very, very limited indeed.
I'm going to ask advice. I know access isn't something we consider, but Councillor Wilmot, I think, brought up quite something related to access, but actually we're asking whether this site will take up to 7 houses. And I think, again, looking at the map and having been there, I can see what he's saying. I did say it at the time, by the time you constructed an access, how much lane is going to, how much of the field or the site is going to be left for actual putting the houses on. I don't know if planners could advise on that.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think it's important to note that, for example, the applicants, if members were minded to approve this PIP application, would need to then obviously provide a full detailed layout, including information on topographical information, so land levels, etc. And the onus would be on them to demonstrate that up to 7 dwellings could be accommodated on the site, whilst also ensuring that technical matters, whether that relate to impact on residential amenity, highway safety, have all been considered and have all been taken care of. It might be the case that that 7 is not possible based on the need to provide a suitable layout, and those technical matters have just gone through. But that would be something that would have to be considered at that second technical details consent stage. And I think it's important to note that essentially the permission is technically granted by the technical details consent application. So it's unfortunate wording, permission in principle, but the actual permission comes from an approval of a technical details consent application. So yeah, all relevant information would be expected to be submitted at that stage in relation to those technical aspects. So thank you, Chair.
Councillor Walton.
I was just going to point out, I mean, sometimes, although there's no obligation to submit a layout plan with these type of applications, sometimes we do get them. But I just wanted to, on the question of what could the site accommodate in terms of number of units, that's obviously very much depends on the size of the units in terms of their footprint and the type. But I was just going to suggest, if you look to the south of the site, you can see that there's a number of, I think, at least 4 pairs of semi-detached properties, can't you? So if you had something equivalent of that nature, then you can see how that compares to the site area. If you had something more spread out, as in on Peachley Lane, you can see sort of here's you know three pairs of semi-detached properties, you know. So it gives you an idea that depending on density, what you can fit into the space. But it doesn't seem that, you know, comparing this higher density with this, you know, that it's out of the question. But that would influence, that would depend upon, again, you know, size of footprint. So but that's not something you would know until the later stage. And if it was too many units, then that would be a reason to refuse at the second stage.
Councillor Walton.
I think the issue with looking at that, Simon, is that land on Jacob there, which is south of it, is already raised up. So, and if you look at the houses on Peachley Lane, I know we talked about the ones to the north and how they've got a steep drive. Actually, the ones adjacent to the, we call it a Jennell in Sheffield, but the alleyway coming down the side of there, they've also got a steep drive. And so whichever way we look at this, in terms of accessibility of this particular site, it's going to need some kind of very steep entrance into it. I mean, there's 3 things in terms of a pit, which is obviously where I'm starting to struggle with this now. On accessibility, the site is in a location where, yes, you could walk. I mean, you know, let's be fair, people are going to be driving down here, so adding to the traffic. You could walk to certain places, but actually all those places are not really suitable. So the bus stops don't have buses after a certain time, so it kind of rules them out in terms of the sustainability of the site, other than using your own transport. The school, as I say, is full, so actually you're going to have to drive to another school. And there are primary schools that do have places, but they're going to be a car journey away. And as we've already said, obviously this will come at a technical stage. There are definitely issues around flooding. The other big thing for me is obviously, as PIP stage, is this land appropriate. We've already established it's agricultural land. It does act as a barrier between here and the neighbouring village, which we'll very quickly lose in. And I suspect that if the district council was going to survive over the next 2 years, that myself and Dean were probably going to end up being joint councillors of some Lower Broadheath / Hallow ward together, because we are becoming conjoined as villages. So I think it's a very useful barrier. So is it appropriate land? I think from what I've heard, I would argue no, not least for the fact that you've got this very difficult height to deal with. Plus its location is to me doesn't sound very sustainable. Plus the fact that it is outside the development boundary and actually serves very well as that purpose to give some divide between villages, which soon won't exist. So that's kind of where I am with it, I think, in terms of what I've heard so far.
I'm going to ask you for a recommendation in a minute. Councillor Harrison wants to say, David, you've had one shout at it, so quite a quick one.
It's going to be very quick. Simon Jones mentioned about the access on foot going via Jacob's Lane, I think it is. I assume that there are no streetlights that way. No. So how can it be sustainable to get there at night, winter or summer?
I think I did concede that it was, you know, it wouldn't be as an attractive proposition in the winter or at night. But the main point I wanted to raise was that we're not just looking at a narrow rural lane in terms of the accessibility point in terms of those facilities, that once you're onto the alleyway and then onto the estate, you've got footways, and that's just something we should recognise.
Daniel, do you wish to make a recommendation?
Thank you, Chair. I think it's a really good discussion on this evening, and I think we shouldn't be worried about bringing PIP applications to committee, because I think sometimes particular parcels of land are just not appropriate for development. And this comes from a village where we've had a lot of development, and we've had development maybe in places we shouldn't have had it. But this is definitely one of those areas where, when you listen to a lot of comments made, in particular from Andrew and David, but other councillors as well, that this isn't. We should be looking at sustainability of land, whether it's appropriate to build in such a place, whether the land use is right. This, to me, just sort of fails in all those areas. So I'd like to move a motion to go against officer's recommendation in this particular case.
Do I have a seconder for that? Mr. Wilmot. Thank you.
So in terms, Simon, as usual, may well help me out with this, but in terms of, I'll pick up on a few things. So highways and access concerns, SWDP 4. So that covers accessibility, I believe. Environmental harm and loss of biodiversity is 22 and 5. There in terms of SWDP, but then also we've got unsustainable location, which I think is probably covered by, is that 25 or 4 as well, isn't it? I think anything else I list is probably going to be a technical detail. So I think they're the ones that can be covered under PIP.
Yes, I think is the short answer to that. Well, I mean, in an effort to be helpful without wishing to guide or influence members in their potential decision to overturn officer's recommendation, I could perhaps sort of pose some rhetorical questions, just for those to hang in the air there. Would the proposal fail to minimise the demand for travel? Is the footway infrastructure in the immediate vicinity adequate? We've mentioned street lighting, and what's been said about that type of travel environment being that I've noted about walking and I guess cycling of an evening, given that the surrounding roads aren't well lit. Are those elements, a sort of feature, don't they? I think in what's been voiced by members. So those reasons could be pulled together into a reason around sustainability, if that is members' feeling. You obviously know what officers.
I'm going to adjourn for a couple of minutes just for Daniel to form the words with you based on those. You don't need that. You can put the words. Would you like to enunciate the words.
Yeah, of course. I think we've obviously covered quite a lot around what essentially would make a piece of land sustainable going forward. And I believe, you know, going against officer recommendation in this case and definitely DP4 based on the fact that there is, you know, people in this particular parcel of land are going to be using their own transport on a road, which isn't particularly appropriate for more traffic. If they're going to walk, which is going to be difficult, there's no footway, there's no lighting. It's still some distance to particular amenities, and those amenities don't potentially give what's required of them. So, example, you know, not appropriate bus service, this particular piece of land, and schools which are full. So I think that covers the lighting aspect, the lack of footways, all down to the location of this particular parcel of land. And then also in terms of access to it and the accessibility, obviously we talked about the height of the land as well and what would need to be done, which obviously we probably understand better at technical level. And then the second bit is the land usage. So again, we talked about removing, you know, the hedgerow, which would have to happen, and obviously the current agricultural use of the land, which would be lost in using this.
My understanding that those are technical matters and wouldn't be
Land use
considered on
comes
that.
under it. I think we can get away
Would
with that. Yeah, I think we can discuss land use.
Yes, on land use, I think really the question is the use of that land in any form for residential development unacceptable, and if so, why? That's the sort of question posed by the land use issue.
I think all of the above to that then.
Yeah. And just to recap then on land uses, why are we saying that's unacceptable as compared to any other, as compared to agriculture, I guess? Was there?
Well, again, in terms of land use, you'd fall back to a lot of things I've just said in terms of its location, but also the fact where it sits. So accessibility to that particular parcel of land is very, very difficult. I mean, while we were on, I mean, this doesn't have to be written up, but while we were on the site visit, we nearly lost a parish councillor to a car, and we saw one driver have to mount the curb to get past it. It's accessibility is a piece of land from where obviously it'd be proposed that access is given is not appropriate, and then once you're out on the road, it's very difficult to get to anywhere because of the lack of lighting, lack of footways, and everything else that we've said. I also think the piece of land used as agricultural land at the moment is obviously more appropriate given its location and the height of it from the road, given the fact that those houses in the north clearly have a long drive, and those in the south are on an estate which is already built up. The ones adjacent to it, they've got long drives as well. So it's just not, you know, again, it's not just from what I have seen and witnessed, but from what the committee members have said, it's not an appropriate piece of land. There are appropriate pieces of land. This doesn't seem like one to me.
I think it depends, Chairman, whether members are content with that sort of. They know the without having something that's finely tuned and wordsmithed, whether they're happy with that as on a basis which to vote. If so, that can be more finessed and fine tuned after the meeting, perhaps in conjunction with the local ward member, reflecting those issues, which are obviously on record now, aren't they?
I think because of the nature of PIP, that would be a very good idea, just so we keep within our. I think everybody is. I'm willing to take any exception to this. I think everybody's quite clear on what the reasons for the recommendation, and we will be able to vote on that. Jenny, can we go to the vote?
As long as everybody confirmed that they're happy.
Yeah, I haven't seen any dissent from that. No.
Can we, Mr. Chairman, just make sure that added into the proposal is that the final wording is between the local ward councillor and the planning officers?
Can do. Thank you.
If that's appropriate.
I think that's what Simon said.
Yeah.
Just to make sure.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So all of those in favour of the proposal to refuse the application contrary to officer recommendation, please raise your voting cards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
I got cast in vote.
No abstentions.
Well, for consistency and to maintain the position as present, then I'm going to vote in favour of rejecting officer's recommendation.
In which case the motion to refuse is carried. Thank you, Chair.
That's the end of the meeting. Thank you for attending, members of the public, and councillors, of course.
Chairman, before everybody